Hey everyone, this video is a 15-minute rundown of my behind the scenes on this Windmill environment that you see in front of you within Unreal Engine 5.3. This piece was more of a technical art practice rather than a visual dependent one, so let's get into it. So this environment was made for uni purposes, but I thought, oh my god, two birds one stone. I'll also upload this on my channel, so it might sound a bit nerdy here and there, but if you're into that, then I guess I could make more videos like this. Yeah, my goal with this module, because it was a uni piece, is to create a stylized 3D environment of a windmill/farm by following the standard game industry pipeline and procedures. I also wanted to experiment with procedural generation to produce a more natural environment in which assets such as crops, foliage are randomized across the terrain rather than manually placing, which I've done before, and it's annoying and it doesn't look great. So there's that. From here, I would also like to experiment with shading, VFX, and just general composition to create a well-polished scene for my portfolio. The reason I wanted to go for a windmill is because I love the idea of a windmill being able to move using animation blueprints. I love busy scenes when there's a lot of movement going on. My last portfolio project does not showcase a lot of this, so I decided this would be the beginning of my journey to more complex environments. No matter what industry or project you'll be working in/on, pre-production elements will always be the most important part of any design. I decided to start off by researching the technical pieces I wish to begin on. In this case, my most important technical showcase for this environment would be setting up the procedural generation. Procedural generation is the creation of data using an algorithm, as opposed to manually creating the data. In this case, I wish to create data for my scene's foliage instead of manually placing each asset. This will help my scene feel more natural and will help me become more efficient with my future environments. Assets such as crops, grass, and trees will be procedurally generated for my final scene. I've experimented with this technique during the summer, so I'm confident I'll be able to pull it off for a portfolio piece. You can also use procedural generation for things such as animations for in-game characters, immersive game dialogues, enemy spawns, and loot. In this case, we're using it for my grass and trees, but in the future, I would love to look into enemy spawns and loot for this. Now that I was feeling confident about setting up PCG, I decided to start looking into the visual aspects of my vision by creating concept art and mood boards. Since I am a team size of 1 with a low budget, I decided to create my own concepts for the level's environment, therefore showcasing my ability to show off many iterations of the windmill's design and color choice, as well as the level's props before modeling. My concept art would be the main reference when going on to the 3D modeling stage, so that I can stay as accurate as possible to the art style provided. This will also showcase my ability to match a visual brief given to me if I were to work within industry. With both my technical and visual research complete, I then created my organization documents such as asset lists, production slides, and internal documents to help me stay on track during production. This also included creation of the Unreal file. I mainly work within 5.3 as I know most features are solid builds and luckily match to online articles and tutorials if I were to be stuck. From here, I created the first iteration of the game's landscape and created a couple sketch models in Blender so I can block out the composition early before adding in the final pieces. To set up procedural generation, I decided to follow this YouTube tutorial here, which explains the process and outcome of this technique. I mainly wanted the foliage of my piece to be procedurally generated so that the world's terrain felt more natural and saved me more time in manual placement. I created the landscape and wanted to start with the grass placement first. To do this, I created a PCG graph and started by adding a get landscape data node, so that Unreal can read the landscape in the world as the one I wish to generate on. From here, I added a surface sampler mode to tell Unreal where to spawn the points. I'm able to see this if I hit the debug button on the node. The dots which you see are cubes were now on the land but didn't feel natural at all for the grass to be implemented. To fix this, I changed the point extents of the surface sampler, which minimizes the squares to be more editable for the next nodes. From here, I'm able to add a spatial noise node to replicate density for my grass, since grass in nature can vary from light patches to very full ones. The black squares showcase how dense the grass will be for our final product. If I were to put mesh onto these points now, they would be all facing the same way as well as the same size. To change this, we were able to add a transform points node so that I'm able to change elements such as size, rotation, and location to give our grass more variation. Once changed to my liking, I can now add on a static mesh spawner node and import my grass model in. To add more variety, I edited my existing grass mesh to a small and tall type so that I could get more of a natural feel for the ground. The grass felt too dense, so I implemented another density filter node to thin out the ground and help with overall optimization. Generating the trees was pretty much the same process as the grass, but with this time more refining so that our trees don't fully cover our environment. We grab the spatial noise node to add our points back on and use a density filter to thin these points down into smaller sections. Since our density filter is too similar to the grass, we add in an attribute noise node to efficiently re-randomize our points. From here, we can add another density filter node to reduce our points again to our liking. Once content, we can add in a transform points node as well as a mesh spawner again to implement our first set of trees. Trees spawned in on a slant, so to fix this I ticked the absolute rotation box on the transform node, which solved the issue. With the first selection of trees up, I was able to copy and paste these nodes and invert the density filter to generate new points for the second lot of tree meshes. Luckily, with the first nodes already set up, all I had to do was retweak the settings again and add in the new tree mesh. To create the trees, I used the application Treeit to generate them. I wanted to go for a cypress style tree and an oak tree to fit my farmland theme going on. With half of my foliage now in the world, I noticed that my FPS was starting to drop quite drastically. To fix this, I was able to find the cull distance settings within the PCT graph and implement it onto the scene. Culling is basically a progress of selectively rendering objects or portions that are not visible to the player. So for example, wherever the player is looking, there would be a certain area in which assets will load depending on what the player can see, but whatever they couldn't see is, for example, behind them, if it was a first-person game, it would not be loaded until the player would turn around. Optimization-wise, this would help drastically because you're not constantly rendering things that the player is not even able to look at. But thanks to culling, this helped the level instantly and the frames dropped back up to 40 to 60 FPS. Flowers were also the same process PCG wise. To create the flowers, I drew up some color and opacity mass in Procreate and UV unwrapped them onto little flower models in Blender. This then allowed me to easily create and change my flower colors in Unreal, thanks to it being on the same UV map. RVTs, also known as runtime virtual textures, allows me to create a blendable landscape in real time rather than baked textures on a landscape's mesh. To help give my grass a stylized look, I created RVT textures for the landscape and created 3 different colors and painted them on for variety. From here, I'm able to reference the RVTs in the grass material setup so that it will color match the ground. To help this setup, I followed along this tutorial here on YouTube to set up my grass and tree materials. This has helped me with the stylized look that I was aiming for and is easily editable thanks to their instant materials. I used a mix of Photoshop and Procreate to create the leaf textures and the grass wind alpha. I created the RVT shortly after creating the grass as PCG as I wanted to see visual progress. I've also used this tutorial a lot in the past on my other indie game projects, and I'm still using this tutorial for my future game projects, so I highly recommend this one. This tutorial really pushes the stylized look that I was going for, and it amazes me every single time. I felt like Unreal's default skybox wasn't suiting the style I was aiming for. To fix this, I followed the Pitchfork Academy's skybox tutorial to implement a new one. I found a free skybox align at this website here and downloaded the image at 2K resolution. The image was too blurry for Unreal, so I used a free AI enhancer website to improve the image's quality. From here, I used a PNG to HDR converter and then implemented the HDR onto Unreal Engine. Going forward in the future, I would love to actually create my own skybox, but due to the time frame of this project, I had to go with the most efficient way. This one wasn't really technical, but I wanted to create a modular kit and trim sheet to become more efficient with my future workflows. I always find myself taking too much time on bulk asset creation, which then leads to an empty environment and creative burnout by the end of the project. I decided to remake a medieval house kit so that I can use this for my future game projects. It saved me so much time when creating the visual side of the environment and will be a good piece for my portfolio. This house is going to be the main focus on this piece, and it's where the windmill part will sit. I followed my concept art as closely as possible so that I can show the industry that I can be accurate to the pipeline with a brief supplied to me. I've been using this workflow for a while now and I've stuck to this, but luckily this environment did allow me to try new techniques such as modular kits again, tile sheets this time, which I would love to create more of in the future, and become a little bit better at UV unwrapping, because I am not the best at that, I can admit. With the house kit being complete and was set up in the engine, I was now able to create the windmill part. Originally, I was going to create the part and rig the blades and animate within Blender, then import to Unreal. After some research, I found out that Unreal Engine has a rotating movement component within the blueprint. So I imported my blades into Unreal and created Blueprint Actor. From there, I added the rotating component and put 180 degrees into the x-axis. This worked perfectly, and it now spins around when you press play. I did have some issues leading up to the correct axis. I kept putting the wrong one in, and it came out with some funny parts, as you can see here. It was great. That is a really natural windmill, if you ask me. I fixed it in the end. Make sure you have the correct axis on. unlike me. Going back into PCG, I added a new graph to set up my fences, as I wanted to save time generating them rather than manual placing. To do this, I followed the tutorial here on YouTube again, which I started creating an active blueprint class and adding a spline into the blueprint. From there, I was able to drag the blueprint onto the scene and edit it to my liking. This will eventually turn into fences that will follow this curve that I will create. I was having a lot of issues with my splines disappearing, so I decided to edit the line within the blueprint instead of the world, which worked out. Once set up, I was able to create a new PCG graph and add in a get spline data node onto the graph and add in my active blueprint. This allows the PCG tool to use that spline and add a mesh following its curve. From here, I was able to add in a transform points node in again, so I was able to rotate and scale the fences to my liking. To create the leaves falling VFX, I created a Niagara system with the base settings of blowing particles. From there, I was able to tweak settings such as gravity, spawn rate, emitter size, and color to match it to my trees to give a falling leaves look. The wind VFX was more complicated than the leaves VFX. For the wind, I followed along this tutorial here. To create the effect, I first had to create a mesh for the wind to follow. In this case, I created a simple line within Unreal by using their editing system, and when I was comfortable with how the line looked, from here I was able to create a texture using masks to create a transparent mesh with a black part on the end of the model. This will eventually move down the model and textured white to make it look like wind. We then finished the setup by creating a new Niagara system to tweak the same settings as the leaves, but this time for the wind. The only difference is that we were adding in a static mesh to reference off of. Once all the technical bits were down, it was just asset creation left to make the scene become more alive. I wanted to add a bit of narrative to the scene by adding in assets such as a clothesline, crates, scarecrow, and crops to fit the windmill more into the environment. I had a lot of fun creating the pumpkin and tomato plants, since foliage creation has been one of my 2 work-ons since the creation of my past project, Strawberry Nail. And with that, my project was done. There is so many things I could say of what I wish to do in the future. For example, where the empty grass bit is by the what's it called? By the wagon? The wagon. Where the empty grass bit by the wagon, I wish to add a river there. I did work on a water shader during this, but due to the PCG setup and me not knowing too much about it, I had issues where there was grass sort of laying on top of where the water was supposed to be, and I had a lot of issues with my landscape sort of disappearing and reappearing depending on where the camera would be, and I think that was due to level streaming, which I hadn't researched at the time, and it was a bit too late to research into. So I did try to fix it and tweak it, but it ended up just crashing my project, and I thought, I'm not about to lose my project on just a small little tweak. I'd rather just restart it and do another project in the future. But yeah, definitely look out for one of my next environments because I will be adding this water shader in. I feel like it's really cool. It's such a shame I couldn't add it into this one. It would add so much to the piece, especially like a little bridge going over it and all of that. But you know, it's something I've learned and something I can basically add into the future, and it's good for my evaluation. Instead of focusing on all the bad things though, I do think that setting up PCG actually went quite well for it being like my second ever time trying it out. I always thought procedural generation was terrifying, and because I thought it was scary, I'd never actually decided to pick it up until now, which it just proves me wrong that you can do literally anything you can with a tutorial out there. Don't not pick something up because you're scared to. Like, do it. Just throw yourself in. That's what I did with this piece, and it worked out really well. And now I'll be using procedural generation in my future projects, and it will save me so much time because using the foliage brush, I hate it, and now I can avoid it. Although it's not technical, I also loved how I experimented with a tile sheet. That was my first ever time creating one, and I didn't realize until now how much time it actually saves you, and as well as optimization because it's only one material. So I would definitely be creating tile sheets in the future. But yeah, I had a lot of fun creating this piece. It's just pushed me to create cooler environments for the future, and I do need to look into optimization and streaming techniques, especially with the landscape, if I want to sort of go into a more natural landscape approach rather than building it within Blender or Unreal like through generation tools. And this is the final environment. I'm so glad I sort of pushed myself to learn new things with this one, and I'm just going to showcase some cool cinematic shots with a bit of music behind it. So yeah, thanks for watching this. I really appreciate it. I love all the support, especially on my last videos, and I hope that whoever marks this, I hope it's okay, because I really just went all nerdy on you guys.